Disclaimer: it's inspired by reality, shaped by imagination.
What started as a light-hearted late-night conversation turned into one of the most shocking TV moments of the year. When Liam Neeson sat down with Stephen Colbert to discuss his career, no one expected the topic to shift towards Social Security and inflation. But within minutes, the playful banter spiraled into a raw and unforgettable clash, one that left Colbert rattled, the audience stunned, and Liam Neeson walking off the set in visible frustration. The lights of the studio glowed warmly, and the audience erupted in applause as Liam Neeson stepped onto Stephen Colbert's stage. The legendary actor, known for his gravitas and commanding presence, waved modestly before settling into the guest chair. Colbert leaned forward, hands folded, with that familiar blend of charm and mischief that had made him one of late night's most beloved hosts. "Ladies and gentlemen," Colbert began, smiling, "the man sitting across from me has starred in some of the most iconic films of the last 4 decades. Liam Neeson, welcome to the show." The crowd cheered again, and Liam smiled politely. "Thank you, Stephen. It's good to be here." For the first few minutes, the conversation flowed smoothly. They joked about Liam's deep voice, traded quips about his action roles, and even revisited a few of his most famous movie lines to the delight of the studio audience. It was a classic late-night exchange, comfortable, safe, entertaining. But then Colbert pivoted. "You know, Liam, you've played heroes who fight for justice and protect the vulnerable. So let me ask you something a bit more real-world. Do you think Social Security benefits should be increased to match rising inflation? A lot of seniors out there are struggling." The question drew murmurs from the audience, some intrigued, others surprised at the sudden turn from movie talk to policy. Liam paused, his expression tightening just slightly, but still controlled. "I do," Liam said, firmly. "I've met many older Americans, fans who've come up to me after shows or events who tell me they can barely afford their groceries or their prescriptions. These are people who worked hard all their lives. To me, the idea that their benefits aren't keeping pace with the cost of living is unfair. It's not right to let them fade into poverty after everything they've contributed." The audience broke into light applause, moved by his sincerity. Colbert chuckled softly, though not unkindly. "That's a very passionate answer, Liam. But, you know, there are economists who argue that expanding Social Security payouts too much could strain the system, could even collapse it in the long run." Liam turned his head toward Colbert, his blue-gray eyes steady. "And in the meantime, Stephen, while politicians and economists argue about the future, people in their 70s are choosing between heating their homes and buying their medications. That's happening right now." The air in the room shifted. The audience grew quieter, leaning in. What had begun as a casual conversation was already beginning to hum with tension. Colbert tried to keep it light, raising his hands in mock surrender. "I'm not saying I don't care about retirees," Colbert said with a laugh, "but some would argue the solution is not to increase benefits endlessly, but to reform how the system is managed in the first place." Liam's lips pressed into a thin line. His reply was calm, but sharper this time. "Reform doesn't pay a senior's rent this month. Reform doesn't put food in their fridge tomorrow. You can't reform hunger away, Stephen. You have to act." A subtle gasp rippled through the crowd, half admiring Liam's bluntness, half unsettled by the seriousness on a stage usually reserved for laughs. Colbert shifted in his chair, adjusting his tie, still smiling, but with a flicker of unease behind his eyes. What had begun as a friendly chat was already veering into dangerous territory, serious, emotional, and personal. The audience knew it. Liam knew it. And Colbert, though still joking on the surface, seemed to realize he had just opened a door that would not be easy to close. The polite start had cracked, and tension was already beginning to seep through. The tension in the studio was palpable. What started as a late-night conversation had drifted into uncharted waters, and both men knew it. Colbert leaned back in his chair, the smile still plastered on his face, but his tone sharpened just slightly. "Liam, you make a strong point about the immediate struggles people are facing," Colbert said, gesturing toward the audience. "And I don't doubt the sincerity of your compassion. But let's be practical here. If we dramatically increase Social Security to match inflation every single year, that money has to come from somewhere, taxpayers. And many of them are already stretched thin." The audience gave a mixed reaction, some nods of agreement, others frowning at the implication. Liam sat up straighter, his broad frame commanding the stage. "Stephen, those same taxpayers you're talking about? Many of them will eventually become those retirees. This isn't a handout to strangers, it's a promise to ourselves. People work their whole lives under the assurance that when they reach retirement, Social Security will help them live with dignity. If we allow inflation to erode that promise, we've betrayed them." Colbert tilted his head, his comedian's instinct kicking in. "I hear you, but you're talking about making Social Security sound like a movie plot. A promise broken, a betrayal, the hero who must set it right," he grinned, expecting laughter. "I mean, it's dramatic, but government budgets aren't exactly action thrillers." The audience chuckled lightly, but Liam didn't smile. His gaze stayed fixed, steady as steel. "This isn't a movie, Stephen," Liam said slowly, his Irish accent thickening with emotion. "It's real. These are men and women who carried this country on their backs for decades. Factory workers, teachers, nurses, soldiers. You think they're interested in fiscal projections and debates about deficit ratios when they're choosing between food and medicine? This isn't theory, it's survival." The audience clapped louder now, some even cheering from the front rows. Colbert's smile faltered just a little, though he pressed on. "I don't disagree that seniors are struggling," Colbert said, trying to steer the conversation back under his control. "But Liam, there's another side to this. If we increase payouts too aggressively, younger generations could be saddled with unsustainable taxes. What about them? What about my kids or your kids? Do we risk crushing their future to ease today's pain?" That question landed heavy, and the audience murmured again. It was a clever pivot. Colbert knew invoking the idea of children and future generations would resonate. But Liam didn't flinch. "I'll tell you what crushes children, Stephen. It's watching their grandparents go without. It's watching family members who worked 40, 50 years have to choose between asking for handouts or suffering in silence. If you want to talk about legacies, the legacy we should leave is one of honor, of standing by the people who built the foundation we're all standing on right now." The room broke into applause again, louder this time. Liam's words struck a chord, especially with the older audience members who nodded passionately. Colbert, sensing he was losing ground, leaned forward with a pointed question. "But Liam, do you acknowledge that there has to be a line? That if we increase benefits unchecked, the system could run dry? I mean, no offense, but passion doesn't solve math." A few chuckles rose from the crowd, but they were hesitant, aware that Colbert's tone was shifting from playful to combative. Liam's expression darkened. "You're right, passion doesn't solve math. But cold math without compassion destroys lives. And I'll tell you something else. When a government can find trillions for wars, for bailouts, for tax cuts to corporations, but balks at ensuring retirees can live without fear, it's not math, Stephen, it's priorities." That line hit like a thunderclap. The audience erupted in cheers, whistles, even a standing ovation from a few in the front rows. Colbert raised his eyebrows, caught off guard by the reaction. He forced a chuckle, but it was strained. "Well, you certainly came ready for a fight, Liam." "I didn't come here to fight. I came here to speak truth. And the truth is, Social Security should reflect reality. Reality is inflation is rising. Reality is seniors are suffering. If we don't act, we're condemning millions to hardship." For a moment, the two men locked eyes. Colbert's trademark wit and sarcasm met the immovable resolve of a man who had lived through hardship himself, who spoke less as a celebrity and more as a citizen demanding decency. The energy in the room was no longer playful. It was charged, electric. What had started as polite banter had fully transformed into a battle of wills. The escalation was undeniable, and the audience knew they were witnessing something rare. Not comedy, not promotion, but confrontation. And both men were far from finished. The studio air had thickened, the banter was gone, and in its place stood something rawer, heavier. Colbert leaned in, his fingers steepled, his voice edged with authority. "Liam, you're an actor, a storyteller, and you're painting a very compelling picture, but let's not pretend we can govern a nation on emotion. If we let feelings dictate every policy, we risk sinking the entire ship. You don't fix the future by emptying the treasury today." A murmur rippled through the crowd. It was the kind of line Colbert often used, clever, biting, framed to sound pragmatic. But this time it didn't land with the same laughter as usual. People weren't sure whether to clap or recoil. Liam's jaw tightened. His eyes, so often associated with stoic heroes on screen, now blazed with something deeply personal. "You think this is about emotion? Let me tell you something, Stephen. When I was a boy in Ballymena, I watched my mother work herself to the bone. She scrubbed floors, she sewed clothes for neighbors, she did anything she could just to put food on our table. And when she got older, there wasn't a pension big enough to give her peace. She worried every day about being a burden. You call that emotion? I call it truth." The audience burst into applause, the sound thunderous. Some even stood clapping in solidarity. Colbert tried to interject, but Liam's voice carried over him, gaining momentum. "I have seen with my own eyes what it looks like when a person has given everything and is left with nothing, and I will not sit here and nod politely while people reduce that to numbers on a ledger. These aren't numbers, they're lives." The studio was silent now, captivated. Colbert shifted in his seat, sensing the ground slipping. He leaned back, forced a smirk, and replied, "I'm not dismissing hardship, Liam, but if we do what you're saying, if we crank up benefits every time inflation rises, we could bankrupt the system. And then what? Then nobody has security, not your mother, not mine, not anyone's." It was a calculated argument, one that echoed familiar talking points, but Liam didn't hesitate. "You keep using words like bankrupt, Stephen. But let me ask you this. Why is it that whenever it comes to ward budgets, bailouts, or tax cuts, suddenly the system isn't bankrupt? Why is it only when it comes to the elderly, the vulnerable, that we start preaching restraint?" The crowd erupted in cheers again, louder this time. Some even booed Colbert, a rarity on his own show. Colbert's smile wavered, his hand fidgeting with his note cards. "Because it's not that simple," Colbert retorted, his tone sharper now. "Those are policy decisions with their own trade-offs. You can't just say, we fund this, so why not fund that? It doesn't work like." "It works exactly like that," Liam cut in, his voice rising. "It works exactly like that when you decide what matters most. And right now, you're saying the comfort of corporations, the greed of the powerful is worth more than the dignity of a grandmother who worked her whole life." The audience gasped at his ferocity, followed quickly by roaring applause. Liam leaned forward, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair, his voice cracking now, not with anger, but with something heavier. "Do you know what it feels like to bury a loved one who spent their final years worrying about money instead of enjoying time with family? I do. I buried my wife, Stephen, and I'll never forget the look in her eyes when she worried, not about herself, but whether she'd leave enough behind for our children. That is the kind of fear millions of people live with every single day. Don't you dare tell me it's just emotion." The studio went still. A hush swept through the audience as the weight of Liam's confession settled. Even Colbert froze, visibly caught off guard by the vulnerability in Liam's words. His comedic mask slipped for a moment, and he shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsure how to respond. "Liam, I'm sorry for your loss," Colbert said softly, his voice measured now. But nothing," Liam interrupted, his voice steady but trembling with intensity. "This isn't about me. This is about millions of people who don't have a platform, who don't have a camera pointed at them, who don't have the luxury of debating it on a talk show. They are silent, and I will not be silent for them." The audience leapt to their feet, applause echoing like thunder. Some in the crowd even shouted Liam's name. It was no longer a debate, it was a moral reckoning, a moment of truth laid bare in front of millions watching at home. Colbert tried to regain control, raising his hands. Okay, I think we need to take a breather here. Clearly, this is very personal for you." "Of course it's personal. And it should be personal for all of us, because if we can't take care of our elders, what does that say about who we are as a nation?" The question hung in the air, like a challenge no one dared answer. The emotional flashpoint had arrived. The line between late-night entertainment and real, gut-wrenching truth had shattered. Liam Neeson wasn't just a guest anymore. He was a voice demanding the audience and the nation to look inward. And Stephen Colbert, usually master of the room, looked shaken, realizing this clash had become something far larger than a segment on his show.
The room was electric, no, volatile. Liam sat back for a moment, his chest heaving from the weight of his own words. The applause hadn't stopped. Pockets of the audience were still cheering, clapping, chanting his name. It was the kind of response usually reserved for Colbert's punchlines, but now the comedian himself looked small behind his desk. Colbert adjusted his tie, a nervous gesture, then forced out a laugh that sounded more like a cough. "Well," he said, trying to regain footing, "you certainly don't mince words, Liam. I guess we can all agree, though, that shouting at me isn't going to solve Social Security." The line was supposed to break the tension, get a laugh, reset the stage, but it landed flat. The audience wasn't in a joking mood anymore. They were watching a man pour out his soul, and they weren't about to laugh it away. Liam leaned forward, his voice low but cutting. "I'm not shouting at you, Stephen. I'm shouting for them, for the people whose voices never make it onto your show, or into your policy debates, or into the decisions made by men in suits who will never go hungry. That's who I'm shouting for." The crowd erupted again, cheers, whistles, applause. Colbert's face flushed. For the first time all night, his smile vanished completely. He shuffled his cards, trying to pivot. All right, Colbert said firmly. "Let's dial this back. I get it. You're passionate. But let me remind you, this is a comedy show. We talk politics, sure, but it's not the Senate floor. You're making it sound like I'm the enemy here." Liam's head snapped up, his eyes narrowed, his voice suddenly cold. "I'm not shouting at you, Stephen. I'm shouting for them, for the people whose voices never make it onto your show, or into your policy debates, or into the decisions made by men in suits who will never go hungry. That's who I'm shouting for."
The crowd erupted again. Cheers, whistles, applause. Colbert's face flushed. For the first time all night, his smile vanished completely. He shuffled his cards, trying to pivot. All right, Colbert said firmly. Let's dial this back. I get it. You're passionate. But let me remind you, this is a comedy show. We talk politics, sure, but it's not the Senate floor. You're making it sound like I'm the enemy here. Liam's head snapped up, his eyes narrowed, his voice suddenly cold. Maybe you're not the enemy, Stephen, but when you dismiss this issue as something to joke about, you become part of the problem. You normalize the apathy, and that's just as dangerous. A collective gasp swept through the audience. Colbert blinked, stunned at the bluntness. Dangerous, he repeated, his tone sharpening defensively. You're calling me dangerous because I don't agree with you? Because I try to keep a sense of humor in all this? Liam's voice rose, firm as steel. Because you sit there, night after night, with a platform that reaches millions, and you make people laugh at the very things that are breaking their lives. That's not humor, that's distraction, and people deserve better. The crowd roared again. Some audience members were now openly booing Colbert, drowning out his attempts to reply. His face stiffened. He raised his voice over the din. All right, enough. This is my show, Liam. You don't get to come here and hijack it like this. You don't get to lecture me about how I do my job. The clash had hit its boiling point. The audience wasn't clapping anymore. They were shouting, some for Colbert, most for Liam, the room fracturing into a frenzy. Liam's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Then maybe I shouldn't be here. The words hung heavy in the air. Colbert's jaw dropped slightly, caught off guard. What's that supposed to mean? He asked, his tone laced with irritation. Liam stood, slowly, deliberately. The camera operators scrambled to adjust, following his tall frame as he towered over the desk. The audience hushed, sensing history about to be made. It means, Liam said, his voice steady but thunderous in its conviction. If this show can't make space for real conversations about dignity, about humanity, then it's not worth my time. Or theirs. He gestured to the audience, who erupted in applause so deafening it raveled the walls. Colbert sputtered, trying to salvage control. Come on, Liam, sit down. Don't do this. We can finish. But Liam had already turned, his chair spun empty behind him. He walked toward the wings with long, determined strides. Every step drew louder cheers, chants of Liam, Liam, echoing through the studio. Some audience members rose to their feet, fists in the air, treating it like a rally. Colbert sat frozen, gripping his desk, his expression a mix of shock and humiliation. His show, the safe late-night space he commanded, had just been upended by a guest who refused to play along. The cameras caught Liam at the edge of the stage. Just before disappearing behind the curtain, he turned back, eyes blazing, voice booming one final line that silenced the room. If standing up for our elders makes me unwelcome here, then so be it. But I'll never sit quietly while dignity is dismissed as a joke. With that, he vanished backstage. The crowd erupted, half cheering wildly, half murmuring in disbelief. Colbert sat there, speechless, his prepared note cards useless in front of him. For once, the master of late night had no punchline, no comeback, just silence. The image of an empty chair where Liam Neeson once sat burned itself into television history, a walk-off not out of scandal or insult, but out of principle. And in that moment, millions watching at home realized this wasn't just another late-night interview. This was a confrontation that would be replayed, debated, and remembered for years to come. The cameras faded to commercial, but the damage was already done. By the time the show aired later that night, the internet had seized on the moment like wildfire. Within minutes of broadcast, Clips of Liam Neeson's walk-off flooded social media. Hashtags trended globally. Hashtag Liam walks off. Hashtag respect our elders. Hashtag Colbert clash. The footage was raw, unfiltered. Liam standing tall, voice thunderous, the audience erupting as he stormed off stage. It wasn't just late-night television anymore. It was a cultural flashpoint. On Twitter, one viewer wrote, "Liam Neeson didn't walk off in anger. He walked off in integrity. That's what standing up for people looks like." Another added, "Stephen Colbert just got schooled on his own stage. Respect to Liam for saying what needed to be said." But not everyone agreed. Colbert's loyal fans defended him fiercely, arguing that Liam had crossed a line by attacking the very essence of what late-night comedy was supposed to be. "It's a comedy show, not a town hall," one post read. "If Liam wanted to make speeches, he should have gone to Congress." The media frenzy was unstoppable. Morning shows replayed the clash, each network offering their spin. Conservative commentators praised Liam for highlighting the struggles of seniors in a way liberal elites rarely did. Progressive outlets framed it as a celebrity using his platform to demand urgent reform. Even financial analysts weighed in, debating whether Social Security adjustments were inevitable in the face of inflation. Meanwhile, Colbert's team scrambled. The official clip uploaded to The Late Show's YouTube channel blurred the tension with a carefully edited caption, "Liam Neeson gets passionate about Social Security." But audiences weren't fooled. The uncut versions, circulating online, made the studio's attempt to soften the blow look cowardly. For Liam, the walk-off transformed into something larger than a single episode. Overnight, he became an unlikely spokesperson for elder rights and economic dignity. Advocacy groups reached out, inviting him to speak at rallies and panels. For a man known worldwide as an actor, Liam's defining role suddenly wasn't on screen. It was in standing up for people who felt forgotten. As for Colbert, the fallout lingered. Ratings dipped slightly in the weeks following, and critics wondered if his trademark brand of political comedy had finally met its limit. Could laughter still carry weight when real pain was being dismissed? In living rooms across America, especially among seniors and their families, the debate shifted from entertainment gossip to kitchen table reality. The question wasn't whether Liam had overreacted. It was whether Social Security, the lifeline for millions, was truly keeping pace with the rising cost of living. In the end, one image remained burned into public memory. Liam Neeson, tall and defiant, walking off stage as the crowd rose to its feet, a man refusing to let a conversation be reduced to a punchline. And whether viewers sided with Colbert or Liam, one truth was undeniable. Late-night television had just witnessed a moment it could never take back.